rehabilitated, and real entertaining. This is the Carl Jackson Podcast.
All right, welcome to today's edition of the Carl Jackson Show podcast. On the podcast with me today is Tyler Israel. Tyler is the owner-operator of Venture Moab. You can find him at venturemoab.com. Also, he's associated or affiliated with SOS-survivalschool.com. And the reason why I wanted Tyler on today is simply because considering that we're hearing ramblings of food shortages that are coming to America, actually that have already hit America, inflation, we're seeing what's happening in Ukraine. I started thinking to myself, what if America was just totally hit? Inflation is bad. Recession looks like it's coming our way. It's going to get harder and harder to find food. God forbid there's some type of electromagnetic pulse attack or something where another foreign enemy tries to attack us here. So I want to be able to survive. I want you to be able to survive outdoors. And so this is the reason why Tyler Israel is with us today. Or even if you just lost electricity, you still, you were still technically indoors, but you needed to be able to survive if we didn't have electricity. So Tyler, it's an honor and privilege to have you on, a longtime friend, and I look forward to you kicking some knowledge to the rest of us people that are just love living in the AC like myself.
Well, thank you for having me on, Carl. It's a pleasure to see you again. It's been too many years since we've sat down and done this in person, but it feels just like I'm back at home now.
All right, cool. Okay, all right. So now, Tyler, explain what you do with venturemoab.com and also SOS-survivalschool.com. Just put your street cred out there, if you will, so the audience knows exactly what you do and why I brought you on the podcast.
Yeah, and again, thank you for having me. I work out here in Moab, Utah, which is a real lovely place, central to Arches and Canyonlands National Park, respectively. And what I do is really kind of take people in a responsible and sustainable manner and, kind of get people acquainted with the outdoors. That can be all the way from people that have never stepped foot outside, like you said, never been outside of the air conditioning before, all the way through folks that are really trying to hone skills in terms of their own survival and preparedness. Anything from like a half-day excursion where we're just kind of like looking at the sites all the way through multiple days excursions where I'm dumping water on people's tents and we're using fake blood and we're trying to actually figure out, trying to figure out where some of our, weak spots are in terms of casualty treatment, some of our preparedness, the kit that we like to go out in the woods with, and overall just mindset. But really it's an opportunity to take people from all over the United States that have got some, really interesting ideas and a lot of people that have had the same thoughts that we're just discussing right now, and are, trying to take actions so that they're not caught off guard should something like you're talking about happen.
Man, okay, so that's interesting. When you talk about dumping water on people, fake blood scenarios, what is that scenario exactly outlining? Is it maybe a rainstorm or a flood or something, and then someone has gotten injured? Walk us through that real quick, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, when you go camping, it's really lovely because you get to take everything that you like as a luxury. And, a lot of people that go camping are really going glamping. They're taking mattresses and proper stoves and everything that you need just to be comfortable and enjoy your experience outdoors. When we're talking about survival, we're talking about a little bit different set of skills. And that's like, what can I whittle away from your comfort and you still be able to get through and thrive? I joke, I have like some of the best job in the world where I get to make people wet and miserable and uncomfortable, and they'll pay me for it at the end of the day. But that's all really to simulate, like you said, like, hey, if you're on the edge of hypothermia at this moment, like what are the steps that you need to take in order to get your body temperature up? Especially like if you don't have another change of clothes. If you're not able to pitch your tent for any number of reasons, are you with the resources available and maybe a little bit of string and a knife able to put together like a lean-to shelter, should that be the case? There's a lot of these different scenarios that you can work through, and a lot of them seem kind of generalized, but because, when you're actually talking about the things that you're talking about, these comforts, they aren't so much comforts as they are, kind of like life-saving or, essentials that you need to keep in touch with. And, living all the time underneath the blanket and setting that air conditioning to 75, it can lull you into a false sense of security of, like I can, walk 10 miles in 110-degree weather. You can't, but it's nice that you think that.
I talked to. Oh yeah, you just called me out on the spot. You got my number. Hypothermia. I mean, obviously that's extremely important. How does it just give us some basic knowledge of what a person has to do to survive a scenario where they would have to fight off hypothermia?
Yeah, I mean, down there in Florida where you guys are, it's not something that you necessarily train for all the time, maybe outside of a few months of the year. But the biggest thing with hypothermia is just managing your thermal loss. So the easiest way I can put this is stay dry, and if you are wet, get dry. And there's a lot of things that you can do basically to make sure that you're not sweating while you're exercising, such that when the temperature does drop after you've been walking all day, you don't have wet, soggy clothes. You're pretty aware that you lose 20 times the amount of energy if you're bobbing around in the ocean than if you're standing on the beach, just because that thermal loss is a much more efficient and exacerbated, when you have moisture kind of surrounding the body. So a lot of things that we do is, like there's creek crossings all the time, and there's reasons why you'd have to jump in a river and get out on the other side. And if you can take some steps immediately in order to get those clothes dry or to build a fire or even in a snowy circumstance, we'll do stuff in the wintertime where we're jumping in a frozen lake. We'll get out and you rub snow all over yourself, which seems counterintuitive, but that snow will actually soak up the moisture such that your body will get drier faster and be able to, again, build that furnace inside of you.
Wow. Okay, that is pretty intense. That's pretty. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So that's neat to hear. All right. So listen. Here's what I did. I just pulled up a column from the Prepper Journal. 10 things, basically, or 10 supplies that you need to have. And I want to just go through them and tell them what you think. And what I want you to do, what I'd like for you to do, is whether it's Florida, whether it's where you're at in Utah, or any other region of the United States of America, just generally speaking, let's pretend like we have no roof over our head, or let's say we endured an electromagnetic pulse attack of some sort would be absolutely miserable. So just generally speaking, some of the things that we can do. So pulling up this column from the Prepper Journal, they talk about dry bags, how having dry bags are extremely important. One of the most important survival supplies is a stock of dry bags, according to them. These are similar to dry boxes, and they are designed to ensure the contents stay dry and untarnished. Would you recommend that? Is there something else you'd recommend?
Yeah, I absolutely use dry bags all the time, especially in river sports. They are essential, being able to pack, just dry goods down the river when you're seeing class 4 and 5 rapids on the Colorado. It'll make your day a whole bunch better. One of the things that I do caution against is, there's probably a list of things, we haven't necessarily gone over this, that people will tell you to go out and buy. But really it comes down to being able to innovate and being able to adapt to the tools and resources you have on hand. One of the things with dry bags is that, they only have a couple years lifespan in them if you're using them every day. The seams on those dry bags and also the material they're made out of, PVC or rubber itself, loses its luster and it loses its waterproofing ability.
Quick reminder, we're speaking to Tyler Israel of VentureMoab.com, owner-operator, and also affiliated with SOS-SurvivalSchool.com. He just mentioned hypothermia. We just talked about that. Obviously do your best to try and stay dry. That was a very interesting, I didn't know that if you were to fall into very cold water, jump into very cold water, you could use snow if you're in those conditions to kind of dry yourself off. Talking about dry bags, we talked about the importance of dry bags, but you were mentioning that there's probably a list of things maybe that we're unaware of, or where were you headed with that, Tyler?
I'd just like to make the point that we often overestimate or overemphasize the utility of certain pieces of gear. And really, what it's most important, in my opinion, is being able to adapt and improvise and take a lot of the things that you might be able to find in your resources at hand, and kind of fit those to the needs that might arise. One of the things I was mentioning with dry bags is just, if you use them all the time, they get brittle. That PVC and that rubber, if it's not conditioned all the time, you start getting cracks. And I've had dry bags that are the best of the line. Within a year of hard use, they're no good anymore. They've lost their entire purpose. Now, can you repurpose that dry bag into something else? Absolutely. But when you start to create a kit, and your kit is very fine-tuned in terms of like, this object is for this specific purpose, it's almost limiting in the sense that it just kind of stifles the imagination of what it could be used for, or how could we innovate around this problem, with maybe some less expensive resources.
All right, so that's a very interesting point. And then just speaking to the average everyday American living in a residential neighborhood, crap hits the fan. Dry bags or something, maybe you can keep them at room temperature somewhere. I think they'll last a little longer if you do that, but obviously in conditions that you're talking about, that would probably be detrimental. Let me just run through a list of things that this prepper thing says you need to have, and I just want you to feel free, Tyler, to comment on it and speak to average. Let's face it, you probably represent 0.1% of the population that can do what you do at this point, if that. I suspect there's more Leah Thomases out there that exist than people like you. I could be completely wrong, but obviously you can survive crazy conditions. But for the average American that's just sitting again under an AC, crap hits the fan, what do they need to do to survive? Let's just say for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, hopefully until things get better, come back offline, or before they're tempted to kill themselves. Fire starters is mentioned, sleeping bag is mentioned, canned liquids, obviously water purification, tablets are some of the things mentioned. Bear pepper spray, a first aid kit would be obvious, even though I think I completely understand your point. I'm not sure how long a first aid kit in horrible conditions would last, but obviously it would be important. Fishing line, I think you mentioned that. A proper map of your immediate location, and fuel are some of the things that they mention on this survival list, if you will, from the Prepper Journal. Is there anything that stands out in your mind, or what would you advise people that are absolute must-haves? And I appreciate your point where you have to be able to adopt, but just generally speaking, for those of us, hopefully we won't have to go through a scenario like that. But if we had to short term, what are some of the things that you would recommend?
All those things are great on there that they were listing as resources that you can have on hand, and certainly does give you a lot of options when you are, trying to make some of these life or death decisions. The one thing that I don't see on a lot of these lists is being in good shape. We really got a wake-up call with this pandemic, and when you are talking about what's most important in terms of like actually being able to thrive and even just survive outside, is just making sure that you can run 5 miles flat out. Are you able to lift your body weight? Are you a liability or an asset in a group scenario? Are you going to have the ability to move? A lot of these things are really overlooked until all of a sudden, you need to get from your house to the corner store in lickety-split and you don't have access to a vehicle. So a lot of this, just being able to be healthy and be active and be conscious and able for yourself is much more important than any resources that you could have on hand. And I just want to stress that to the T. The number of people that I have as clients that come out and they've got every knick-knack and paddywhack in their backpack, but they cannot walk 3 miles to save their life. It's kind of counterintuitive.
Wow, you know what? It's sad, but it's a great point. And honestly, I hadn't thought of that, at least not for this conversation. I had thought about it in the past. I used to be in good shape, not so much anymore, so that was pretty convicting.
It's the same for all of us, yeah.
I appreciate it. No, but it is an excellent point. I mean, if you can't survive walking 3 miles, 5 miles, 10 miles. Hopefully you wouldn't have to flat out run 5 miles, but God forbid you did. You never know in the worst case type scenarios. I mean, just look at Ukraine. These people, sitting in their apartment rooms, and one day and then the next day they have to run and get out of Dodge. You get inside of a car, you might get shot up by friendly fire, quote unquote, or Russian artillery. God knows. You may not be able to take that car. You may need to just run, and So it's a really good point.
In that same context, just like the Russians right now you're seeing a whole bunch of ineffectual fighters because a lot of it comes down to not good training, and I think it's pretty obvious that like when you have a fighting force that's in shape and is able to get out there and be able to repair vehicles on the fly and move 200-pound tires all of a sudden, you don't end up leaving equipment in the field, and you're able to be just a little bit more of an effective like fighting force. So I mean, I think there's that one example like lends itself to, hey, like if you can get out there and just do physical activities, and you enjoy doing physical activities, then you're going to be putting yourself in a better position to just be in a survival scenario all around. So,
good point. Really good point. You're absolutely right. It seems like that's why they're going ape-tardo with weaponry, because their fighters aren't as efficient. So really good point. All right, fire starters. Okay, so listen, I have a few fire starters. Both my wife and I in our preparedness kits, if you will. But if we don't have a fire starter, basic way to start a fire, just teach us something here, Tyler.
Easiest way, and this is something you could find try and true, is just having a ferro rod on you. Some steel and some magnesium is very easy. They sell them in these little rods, and they often sell something to scrape with that rod. Basically, just taking a little bit of magnesium off of a ferro rod and then striking a spark to that little pile is plenty to get a fire moving. One of the big things that I also caution against is having like really elaborate setups for starting a fire. At the end of the day, you can rub two sticks together. No one wants to do it. It's not a fun process. If you've ever trained doing it, you never don't want to do it again. But quite honestly, like having a few Bic lighters and having a few waterproof matches is enough to kind of suffice most of your issues. And like in our modern world, even if everything were to go to the absolute dogs, you're still going to be able to find Bic lighters probably 100 years into the future, seeing as how they don't decompose. So I'm not necessarily too worried about procuring fire starting materials. One of the things I heard mentioned on that list, though, was water purification. And that is something that is a little bit farther down the line from, like, let's say, boiling water. But a lot of scenarios, you may not want to start a fire, especially, in the part of the country that I live in. We have fire bans, and we have the real risk of starting forest fires all the time if you're just out there trying to boil water. Having access to bleach and knowing how to dilute water down to a palatable and safe drinking level while still killing off all the bacteria. Iodine is something I wouldn't necessarily recommend, but a lot of people use in their water purification systems. Really, you can go out and get an aqua filter or a Sawyer water filter for very cheap from every Walmart in the country. You can take that one little water filter and make up to like 1,000 or 5,000 gallons, depending on the model. And that is enough for generally like a year of water for one person.
What if electricity is gone out though? Then what do you do then?
Well, luckily all those filters are gravity fed. So you actually have a big bag that you fill with contaminated water. It runs through a hose and a little tiny water filter, and then you have your bottle that's placed underneath that. So completely powerless, all using just the energy of gravity. Does take a little while, so you do have to do some planning before you start chopping your potatoes to boil some dinner. But it's a really great resource, and just having a couple of those on hand, they're like $10-15 a piece, can really kind of shore up some of your water security issues for a large family over the number of weeks.
Man, that's good. All right, that's really good to know. I gotta be honest with you too. The information that you shared about fire starters, or waterproof matches, so on, etc. That was really comforting. I felt like, okay, I did something right. So that was pretty good. All right, sleeping bag. Sleeping bag sounds nice and great. I'm not sure. I want you to speak to that. I'm not sure how realistic that is after a week or two outside, but speak to sleeping bags, and obviously canned foods that have some liquid in them is what they recommend here. So if you could speak to those things quickly.
Yeah, I mean, sleeping bags is imagining a scenario where you don't have central heat. If you are going to be in kind of like a four-walled structure, a sleeping bag really comes in handy when you're talking about a little bit north of the Mason-Dixon towards wintertime. And if those people aren't able to get access to natural gas, or if you're having an issue like getting coal deliveries or petroleum deliveries, or electricity, all of those things compromise the ability for you to heat your house. I believe it was just last year, like Texas showed, just a little bit of cold weather for a little bit of time put a lot of people's safety and comfort in jeopardy. And a scenario like that, when you are watching the pipes burst in your house, it might be a comfort to have like a 0-degree sleeping bag to where you can get nestled up and have a good night's sleep, as to not compromise some of your decision making, maybe going forward, maybe turn those pipes off a little bit further on. So yeah, I think a sleeping bag isn't necessarily such a comfort item as it is a survival item in the winter, and especially without access to central heating in your home. In terms of the canned food, I'm a big believer in canned food, but I'm a big believer in canned vegetables and canned proteins. When we're talking about having those watery cans, your green beans, your peas, your collards, your spinach in the can, your Popeye spinach is always going to be something that is very valuable. Those phytonutrients and a lot of those minerals and things that you cannot get through your fortified grains is going to be something that you want to supplement on the regular with some of those canned foods. I'd stay away from canned beans, canned rice, anything that's a grain can basically be dry stored, and it's much more effective to be dry stored. The protein is something that everyone overlooks because it's very easy to go out and get a whole bunch of canned food and be eating Chef Boyardee's for 8 weeks, and all of a sudden your stomach is an absolute wreck. So in terms of long-term nutrition, I have a lot of canned chickens, a lot of canned turkeys, just really stuff that you're able to open up, heat up very quickly, add to, some rice and beans or something like that, and get some additional protein. It's amazing how if you are on a carbohydrate-centric diet for weeks on end, that you will actually start wasting away, and it's just not necessarily the best in terms of energy levels and maintaining a good attitude on life. So having canned proteins, I think a lot of people overlook, but is a really good way to store protein for a long period of time.
Okay, that is very, very good information. I do stock up on canned tuna in water, so I think that fits the bill. So I tried the canned chicken in its own water or whatever, and it makes me want to gag. And I'm like, at that point, I don't know if I want to die or not. So, but tuna I can handle, which is weird because I hate seafood, but I like canned tuna of all things. All right, a couple of other things that they talk about: first aid kit, bear pepper spray, fishing line. If you could take those on.
Bear spray is totally dependent on whether or not you're in bear country. And I'd say for most people, not necessarily something that you need to go out and run up and stock up on. However, if you are in the Pacific Northwest or you find yourself like in Montana, that might be something you want to worry about. In terms of a first aid kit, this is something I can talk a lot about because I do work in conjunction with EMT training, what we call WOLFR training, so Wilderness First Aid Responder training. There is, in this culture, the attitude of we are not going to fix you up until we can get you to the highest level of care and get you patched up basically in a center that is designed for that specific purpose. In Wilderness First Aid Responders, what we teach is basically you may not be able to have a medical intervention for some time. So what are the things that we can do to stabilize you in the backcountry? And perhaps even perform some minor medical interventions in order to keep you from having to go visit, said hospital in the future. So a lot of people have a first aid kit, but they've never practiced actually using it. Using steri strips, God forbid, have something, draining abscesses, draining, just basically taking care of blisters. You'd be shocked by how many people will walk on a sore until it is unmanageable, or your foot is now totally inoperable because you could have taken some steps hours or maybe a day ago that would have prevented a pretty large infection. There are some services today where you can go out and with a consult with a doctor, actually have some very light antibiotics prescribed to you for a backcountry scenario, which is something that I don't necessarily want to give out too much information on because it's a little bit beyond your initial survival training. But having access to antibiotics, having access to like clean, sterile gauze, and like simple medical equipment like tweezers and needles and hypodermics. All these things are important when you think about just longevity in the backcountry and maybe not being able to have a medical intervention for some time. So yeah, I would really suggest if anybody in the audience is interested in getting some training, maybe going through some practical scenarios, finding someone in your area that is willing to actually go out there and simulate injuries such that maybe you can get a little desensitized and start to, instead of having a panic reaction in those scenarios, have like a triage response, or be in a training mode, or have a list of things that occur automatically in your head rather than a freak out moment, which is a very empowered position to be in.
Man, that's such a great point. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's one of the things, if you're not in nature all the time and doing what you're doing, it's just, you don't consider, and I hadn't considered, I mean, a lot of people, they see injury, they see blood, they're just, oh my God. And instead of being helpful in the situation, so such a good and valid point. I mean, you said Bear pepper spray isn't necessary. I'm one of these people where I don't want to see anything or feel anything crawling on me. So I would keep Bear pepper spray just for insects, for God's sakes. I'll use it on a roach
bear
if I
spray
have to.
seasoning, but you're concerned about large animals like that, I would suggest a larger caliber round.
That is a very good point. All right. All right, and I do have that in my survival kit as well. All right, fishing line. I hear about fishing line all of the time. I've seen it on Naked and Afraid. So I'm assuming that can come in. It could be extremely handy. A proper map of your immediate location. If you can't count on your phone, looking at GPS, so on, etc. Fuel is another thing. So take those on. Fuel, a proper map of your location, and fishing line.
Yeah, fishing line is a survival item that is worth its weight 3 or 4 over in gold, and not just for fishing. Fishing line, depending on what strength test it is excellent as suture material should you happen to need something in that scenario. It's also great for stitching clothes, which a lot of people don't think about, but if you blow out the rear end of your pants and those are the only pants you have to make do. So there's little things like that fishing line is useful for. A lot of people like to think of fishing line as just being for the protein supplement that it might bring in. But using just fishing line and a hook, from my own experience, is not something that's fun or efficient. So I have fishing line in my own survival kit for a number of different things, probably the last of which is being fishing. One of the things that, if you are looking to supplant your protein, having a casting net, like in your area of the country, is something that's really great. If you can just go out into a canal or a small lake or right there off the coast and get you a whole bunch of bait fish, those cook up and you don't have to gut them or anything like that. Not exactly appetizing, but it'll put, protein on the plate. Out here, where there's not a whole lot of water in my neck of the woods, the thing that would probably be the most similar to fishing line is an air rifle, a BB gun, or a Henry survival rifle. Something that's in a 22 chamber, either propellant driven or air driven. Something able to take small game, basically from prairie dog all the way up to muskrat, all the way up to, some things that fly and some hare. All of this stuff is really great to supplant protein with. So that would be kind of my suggestion in that scenario. Fishing line. What was the other thing we were just mentioning there?
Fishing line, a map of your immediate location in case your phone goes out, all that kind of good stuff, and fuel.
So the map, I can also say this is one of those things that is worth its weight in gold. I have got friends that have got most of their net worth tied up in laminated Teflon maps. Um, it's kind of funny to think that that's where their money goes, but those are also the people that if the electricity goes out, I want to be really around. Um, Having not just a road map or an atlas, which is very important and useful, but having a map of the local resources is also really important as well. So river maps, topography maps, maps of the boundaries of your national and state forests is something really good to know as well. And something that's also really interesting to know is something that's become more talked about recently is that a lot of these applications on your phones will actually have property owners maps as well. So it'll overlay public lands and privately held lands on apps like Onyx Hunt and like Onyx Off-Road and things. And it might be just in your benefit to explore some of those maps or those applications before some of these scenarios happen, such that maybe, like old Farmer Joe that's down the street, he might have some extra land that you might want to set up on for a little while, just for a few trades that you can make, or maybe some, for some help managing that property in such a weird scenario as we might be discussing. So I think it's really important to have maps for a number of reasons, not least of which is to, be able to explore your environment after something bad were to happen. Fuel is a little bit more difficult. Fuel is something that... Sorry, go ahead. Fuel I was going to mention is just a little bit more difficult in terms of like making a long-term storage or stockpile of. You can run a generator off a diesel tank, and a lot of people in Florida will have 10, 15 gallons sitting aside for that small little rollout generator to keep the refrigerator going after the power goes out. But really, not a whole lot of people have longer than a week's worth of petroleum or just fuel in general on them. Being able to power your devices, I think, is really important. If you still have access to those devices in a SHTF scenario, one of the things that's really cool is having a fold-out solar panel, which nowadays you can pick up for like $80. It's something you can lay out in the sun and charge your phone, so that in the situation where you do have service or you do have Wi-Fi or something, that you can still get access to some good information. But I all the time talk about with people about how to procure yourself a large amount of fuel in order to be able to do work with. There are places in Alaska and places in Utah where I'm at now where you can walk up into a hillside and dig coal right out of the ground and burn that coal, which this moment would be illegally. But after the government collapses, it's really a free-for-all at that moment. So being able to know where your coal resources are is really important. I also live really close to a natural gas fracking facility. And there's a whole lot of wellheads all over the United States, basically starting around the New Meridian, right there in the Mississippi, kind of like Louisiana region, all the way through the Rocky Mountains and out through California, where you're able to find wellheads that aren't producing commercially anymore, but big stakes sticking out of the ground that you could tap right off and start burning, nature's natural gas right out of the pipe. So that's something that people might want to be looking up and entertaining and investigating before something bad were to happen, such that you might have all the plumbing fixtures in order to basically plumb right up to an old fracking site and run a generator off of and do some work, whether that's charging devices or just having access to fuel gives you so many opportunities in terms of just being able to do things.
All right. Let me ask you this. And again, we're speaking to Tyler Israel. He is the owner operator of VentureMoab.com. Basically, you can you can set up tour guides with Tyler where you can go out and for a half a day, like he said, a half day's excursion, or you can train with him on how to survive in the wilderness in worst case scenarios for days on end, so on, etc. Also, you can visit sos-survivalschool.com, and he's also associated or affiliated with that as well. So you can learn a lot from this guy on survival. I tell you, as times get tougher and tougher, I'm sitting here thinking, Tyler, like, okay, I don't really need to know all this information. I just want to be able to go out and experience chilling with Tyler for a day. But now I'm starting to think it looks like the crap is going to hit the fan scenario might be coming. And I'm like, oh my God, we need to know the basics of this stuff. Is there anything that you would add? You made a great point about being in shape. I'm going to make sure that I start that tomorrow. But is there anything else that you would add that, people like me, average everyday Americans, not thinking about this stuff, needs to be aware of? Anything you want to add on?
Yeah, I'd say in addition to just being in shape, the number two thing that you can possibly do is having a plan and having multiple plans. We had a pandemic that happened recently, and a lot of people sat back and they accepted carte blanche, whatever the government was telling them, without any real, critical thought about what was maybe the best for themselves, their family, maybe senior citizens in their family, not sending them to a home or maybe pulling them out of a home before something like that were to happen. That's a microcosm, but if you have a plan for, hey, let's just say we hit a 50% inflation rate like Argentina next year. What is your plan in terms of your paycheck every week that you get it? That's something that you need to possibly think about in terms of where your hard-earned dollars are spent as the currency's inflating. In addition to that, like something that you guys experience a whole much more than the rest of the country is a hurricane. Having a plan for that. I know it's like cliche, and a lot of meteorologists make their buck off saying having a plan for a hurricane. But yeah, that's as simple as knowing where to evacuate to and when to evacuate. How many days out does that hurricane need to be at a level 4 before you say, all right, we're going to Georgia? One of the things I like to think about all the time is like, hey, there's a number of scenarios where the power would go out, whether that's supply chain issues, the EMP that you talked about, but something that's even more relevant than I think a nuclear disaster at this moment in time is the sun is entering a solar maxima. And last week, I was just witnessing a solar aurora that was happening right here in Utah. Now, the aurora borealis is only supposed to be up normally in Alaska and in Sweden and things. But we are experiencing a whole bunch of solar storms that are actually pushing that light show down further in the United States. A scenario where a sun has a solar flare, which they've had 4 of in the past 2 weeks, that's not directed towards Earth. If any one of those hit Earth, it would have wiped out GPS, satellite communications, and electricity into a large part of our power grids. If the power goes out and you're not able to get information on your Wi-Fi or your cell towers, like, what is your plan from that moment forward? If you're able to get information but the power goes out, what's your plan look like at that moment? Are you running away to the woods, or are you waiting 12 to 24 hours to see if anything changes? Maybe the power comes back on. All of these scenarios are important to think of and have plans beforehand such that you can make informed decisions when the world is going crazy. It's going to be very easy to make irrational decisions kind of in the moment, but if you have already made these decisions beforehand, you're just following a plan of something that you've already acted out in your head. It's difficult and maybe sometimes unwise to spend a lot of your time thinking about the nuclear, biological, or chemical threats that might be coming in from foreign powers, but certainly thinking about stuff that might affect you at home, the power going off, your internet not being working for multiple days in a row, the EBT system for some reason not caching, and a whole bunch of people not being able to get supplies from the store, supply chains disruptions. I mean, this is stuff that we're seeing currently, and a lot of people are just kind of going about it as status quo. And in fact, you need to just be looking at each one of these scenarios and saying, hey, like, if this were to perpetuate or if this were to exacerbate in the future, at what point do I make a decision that's going to alter how alter my lifestyle? So I think those are important things to think about. Number 3, in addition to those 2 things that I just mentioned, having a community of people that you can fall back on and trust, and whether that's friends, neighbors, family. If you have a plan to stick it out in your neighborhood, make sure you know who everybody is around there. Make sure that you're, not at odds, and you're not looking at the Joneses' nice stuff and saying, "I can't wait for this to go down. I'm going to steal everything they have." Because if everybody has that mentality, it's not great for the long-term health of just like local communities, which I think is how these scenarios get ridden out at the end of the day. Is like people pulling together, cooperatively using brain power rather than segregating brain power and fighting against each other, solving problems in groups. All of this stuff is not something that you're able to accomplish on your own. And the division of labor in a survival scenario is unbelievably helpful. You've seen it on Your Naked and Afraid, but it's like you go get firewood, and I'm gonna go like try and grab shellfish or something like that. You can extrapolate that to every bit of survival and comfort that you can think of, and just having more hands on the problem is infinitely easier. So yeah, just being able to communicate and having, if you aren't planning on sticking around in the neighborhood and you are in the scenario that you're imagining, where you're going, your bug out location or your friends or family's house in another state or something, make sure that you have connections out there. I hear all the time like, oh, if it ever gets bad, I'm just going to run away to the woods. And it's like us folks that live in the woods, we're like, you think we want you here?
Fair point. Fair point.
So, it's again, important to have a plan and follow through on that plan when you have these scenarios arise. And I think the fourth thing that's, kind of overlooked is kind of taking stock in what you have and trying to get more. I think that's, at the end of the day, like when we talk about preparedness, what we're talking about is not being subject to making bad decisions or rash decisions. And the more that you have your material basis covered, the less that you're in a scarcity mindset, the less that you are struggling, the more informed and the more conscious decisions that you're going to be able to make as hard decisions come about. So, there's a couple books I'd recommend. An author called Joel Skousen has written a book called Strategic Relocation. He's gone through and overlaid numerous scenarios that we're talking about and kind of attributed a survival rating of 1 through 5 to each one of the United States. So he'll go through basically each one of the states and say, hey, this is where the national forests are, this is where the water resources are, this is where the climate is, this is where they've got a Titan II missile silo that's going to be one of the first strike points from Russia in a nuclear exchange. And kind of lays all these things out in terms of where are some of the best spots in the United States to kind of like link up and try and fight it out. The other one thing I would suggest, and this is going to come off kind of silly, but I do think there's incredible information in it, is the LDS Preparedness Handbook. The Latter-day Saints have been practicing preparedness for 200 years. And it just so happens every LDS family that's Orthodox has got 4 years of food and water for every man, woman, and child in that family. Wow. And it's something that's part of their faith, and they give sermons on in terms of basically how to stay prepared and how to can food and how to be in positions where they're not subject to making compromising decisions. And that's one of the reasons why that religion is so powerful, is that they don't have to be really subject to any resource, what's the word I'm looking for? Resource externalities.
All right. Okay, so man, this is honestly, you have given us so much to think about. This is pretty fascinating. I almost feel, how would I frame this? Just looking at this prepper journal, it's like you just filled in the gaps for me. The stuff that we just don't think about. Again, everyday average Americans. You're sitting in your house under AC, apartment, kind of whatever it may be, and you just never think of stuff like this. And then I just think with everything that we're seeing, food shortages, the supply chain crisis, what we're seeing in Ukraine, I'm like, you know what? We've been so extremely blessed in America. I don't care what race you are or what, none of that stuff matters. If the crap hits the fan, you've got to be ready to survive. And Tyler, I think you have done a phenomenal job of informing us of things that I just frankly never considered. So you just filled in a lot of gaps for me. So listen, I appreciate you being on. If you want to, again, just mention your businesses and where people can find you, that would be absolutely great. And hopefully some people will contact you, or at the very least, listen to this podcast and develop a plan, develop a community of people, get in a better shape. You know, I've been convicted on all of these things, frankly. So I look forward to being better prepared. And you've given me an excuse. I've been procrastinating on buying a .22 rifle. You've given me an excuse to go out and get one. So we'll take care of that one.
Air rifles, because that .22 ammunition is still expensive, but you know,
true.
I can still pump my Daisy rifle, and you know, those pellets are pretty cheap.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
Yeah, you can venturemoab.com. Again, I'm out in Moab, Utah, and really central to the Arches and Canyonlands National Park. And that's more of like your vacation scenic style, seeing things. I also work with a company called SOS-survivalschool.com. And if you're someone who's wanting to do a little bit of training and also chalk it up to a vacation, you know, come out here, enjoy the sights, enjoy hiking around, but also have a focus on, you know, a little bit of preparedness and just some scenario-based training in terms of first aid, communications, and just making sure, you know, that you're comfortable in a scenario where maybe you don't have all the comforts. So.
All right, perfect. Good stuff. Tyler Israel, thank you so much for joining us today on the Carl Jackson Show podcast. It's been fun, man. It's been very eye-opening. So I appreciate you.
Well, excellent. We'll have to do it again sometime. And yeah, if ever want to talk about this some more, then there is not any lack of information on the internet. It's just a curation of that information, which I think is important. A lot of folks may not have actually practiced what they're preaching, but it's important to maybe go out and try these things yourself. So again, thank you so much, and look forward to doing this again.
All right. Thank you, man. God bless you. Okay, and listen, people, for those of you that are tuning in, please, wherever podcasts are found, Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, Rumble. I really like to build up Rumble. You can find the podcast there. Also, SalemPodcastNetwork.com, SalemPodcastNetwork.com. Also, CarlJacksonShow.com. The podcasts are put on there daily as well. So SalemPodcastNetwork.com, CarlJacksonShow.com, wherever podcasts are found, subscribe and share. I've really enjoyed this show, and I hope you did too. And I learned a lot, and I'm sure you did or will as well.